Success is the biggest way to look back on your life and not have regret. Paramedic school was the biggest pride that I ever had at a graduation. Find what's special to you. Seek out stuff that's hard. Make that be the bread and butter of how you run your own education, because your education is really something you're responsible to maintain. The old learning environments used to be very much, it's not ACLS, it's not paramedic school unless like someone leaves crying. It's not good for learning. It's not good for people's self-esteem. It's not good for their development. I wanted to take apart systems and fix them. Be the change when you see something that needs to be changed. That's the vision and the future and the hope that I have for EMS, and I do think that even if it takes a little while, it will get there. My name is Maria Tsavaris. I have been in EMS for about 12, 13 years. I was an EMTB. I did my training while I was a full-time undergrad student. And then I decided I really wanted to be a paramedic. So I went right into that in August, right after I graduated, and I've been a paramedic since 2014. I have some teaching certifications. I work as a per diem instructor a few places. I teach at the Hotzilla for the women over in Rockland. I also have accumulated kind of a bunch of different, critical care certifications and things like that. I'm a social worker as well, an LMSW, in addition to having an MBA. And now I'm really looking forward to meeting and kind of helping the incoming paramedic class and anyone who's in the process of becoming a new paramedic. I was working in a church and the organist was a paramedic, and we had a bunch of medical emergencies that would happen because you get a bunch of people together and things go wrong. She would always kind of know what to do, and I sort of felt like I didn't know what was going on or any way to help. And I thought, it would be kind of a good life skill to figure that out. So I sort of went into EMT school with this is just going to be like an additional skill that I have. And then it ended up turning into kind of my career instead. I do find that all of the years of learning an EMS, whether it's as an EMT basic, which is now just an EMT, or an EMT paramedic or critical care, all of those skills and essentials that you learn in order to be a good healthcare provider really translate to all of the other things that I've done either professionally or in my personal life. My husband has a joke that anytime we're on an airline, it's inevitable that someone will have a medical emergency and they will ask for a doctor and then a nurse, and then eventually they'll be looking for paramedics. So it's just kind of the running joke. We actually just had a concert this weekend, my husband and I sing, and someone fell and, of course they needed a paramedic. So that was a whole thing. So it sort of actually brought me back to that moment and that story of, how I got into this in the first place, and not knowing what to do, and now kind of being able to just know what to do and, take control of the scene. And I thought about this for a long time. I kind of went back and forth in my brain, what was going to be helpful, what was not going to be helpful. And originally I was thinking, maybe I'll spend one day on this topic, one day on that topic. And then I sort of morphed and changed into thinking, you know what? There's so much switch tasking that happens in EMS in general, but also in paramedic school, because you can't just kind of take a break for a month or two and learn ECGs, take a break for a month or two and learn how to do patient assessment. Everything kind of has to be concurrent and sort of scaffolded and integrated into your learning process. And honestly, EMS in general is like that, right? We don't have the luxury to kind of hit the pause button and focus in on one thing or take care of one person at a time. We have to triage, we have to really kind of multitask and acquire more resources when we need more resources and know how to get them. And so I kind of want this course to reflect a lot of those skills in sort of an organic way, where students come in, they have about an hour per lecture for about 6 topics a day that are consistent times each week on Thursdays. So they'll always come in and they'll start with med math. They'll always leave with some sort of life skill or professional skill or some sort of self-regulation, and like kind of a wellness aspect. It's sort of like when you work out, right? Like you go to a workout, you stretch, you do the workout, you cool down. I want this to be like that, where you come in, you sort of get your warm up, you get into the content, and then you sort of do like a wind down, and then you have some work to digest in between, that you work on to just kind of keep your skills and your knowledge fresh. So the main topics that we sort of broke everything down to, it's the medical math, it's the pharmacology, ECG, patient skills and scenarios, the anatomy and physiology, and then, those essential life skills of like, how do we study? How do we manage a scene? How do we keep ourselves regulated even though chaos is around us? And EMS tends to attract people that have this dysregulation because they already are in it, right? Like it's easy to be dysregulated when you're already dysregulated. And, that can be a reflection of ADHD, that can be a reflection of like some formally diagnosed thing, OCD, or it can just be like a personality trait. Like there isn't any pathology to it. It's just you like dynamic, exciting, adrenaline driven environments. And so when you have people attracted to a profession like that, you're going to have this sense of dysregulation, and that doesn't always bind well and bond well with trying to get the work done, trying to get the skills, trying to get the knowledge and the understanding. So I really want to bridge that gap with these students, having experienced it myself, having been through paramedic school, having lots of friends who've been through different paramedic programs, all over the tri-state. And I really polled them and I said, what are the topics you wish you had a little bit more of a bite-sized introduction to before you started? And all of them really came up with the same topics. Everyone said EKGs, everyone said pharmacology, everyone said, more patient assessment, more BLS, like more getting comfortable with that BLS content and kind of having it be second nature instead of something that you have to think about or look up. And of course, everyone always complains about mathematics because if we were all going to be calculus teachers, we wouldn't be in EMS. That's not what we want to do, right? We want to do EMS. But medical math is really important and it's a patient safety issue. So it really comes back to those whys of what do we do this for? We do this for the patients, right? And if patient safety is essential, which it is, then that med math becomes really important. And then that gives us the motivation to sort of get through it and learn it in a way that makes sense to us so that we can perform it appropriately. And that's what all those topics come down to. But I find, especially for the math, that's kind of how it works. Learning is an ongoing process. It's not like something that you put a start and a stop button on, and then like you start school, you end school, and then the learning stops. With every professional certification or license, there is some degree of continuing education. So I think that changing that mindset to the fact that you're always learning is something really important to keep in mind, even when you become fully, certified, licensed in any career in medicine that you want to establish, including EMS. It really starts with that lifelong learning piece and accepting that as part of your fate. If this is where you want to be, then you're going to be a lifelong learner. And, I don't know if it's really the same for something like accounting or, that kind of doesn't change. I remember when I got my MBA, I was almost like confused. I was like, wait, there's no maintenance for this? Like, I don't have to like turn in like CME. I don't have to like prove that I can still do this every couple of years. Or with being a social worker, with being a critical care paramedic, with being a New York State paramedic, all of these come with these different requirements. So I think that the sooner you accept and acknowledge and kind of sign up for that intrinsically, the easier it is to sort of like get on the train and kind of do what you need to do in that routine. So I think the summer will start that routine and get people into that mindset and into that framework so that it becomes more automatic and it's not, something so manual and painful. It's kind of something that is just part of like your routine and kind of how you handle things. Transitioning from maybe the prep course into the actual course in the fall, just something to keep in mind is this should sort of help you highlight your areas of strength, your areas of weakness as far as the content, or even just how you study, how you relax, how you get motivated. And so sort of trying to attune to those different things during the process will help students be successful. I'm hoping, in the future. And I really look at this as a way for me to learn from the students too, right? Like what else do they need? Are there any gaps in this that we want to, add in maybe to do it again, right? Are there any things maybe we don't have to spend as much emphasis on. Maybe some of the sessions should be shorter. So I look at it as like a learning experience from both sides. But I think that we're starting with a really solid framework to kind of get that data from the students, both formally and informally. Students will have their own self data to go forward and say, you know what, I really struggled with this. I'm going to spend more time each week looking at this topic. Whereas this other topic comes a little more easily to me. I can sort of just skim through and kind of go through the motions on that one and sort of, tandem what I need to learn as I go. Something that comes to mind and something that I did for myself when I was in paramedic school. I don't know how active or passive this process was, but I took my textbook and I broke it up into sections and I had it bound so I could take it on rotations without having to carry like a 10-pound weight with me everywhere. Getting organized and setting yourself up for success. We live in a world of technology. You could take 10 different tests, you could take 100 different tests online to find your personality type, to find, your strengths and weaknesses as far as like your concentration and your focus. And so I encourage people to really just do a lot of self exploration in order to sort of set themselves up for more success, because you will bring whatever your personality traits are into any job that you do, especially something as vulnerable as EMS, where you're in charge of the well-being of other people as well as yourself. And EMS is also the kind of profession that you're not just going to be training people in 5 or 10 years once you get, X many years of experience or X many degrees. Like 6 months into your new job, you'll be training someone else. You're then like the content expert. It happens very quickly. So I think it's very important for people to sort of like be real with themselves and look introspectively and think, what are my life skills that I need to acquire? Do I need to like learn patience? I'm learning patience every day. One of the best things anyone said to me was, if you don't acquire patience or learn it, like life will beat it into you, and it truly will. So there are just certain things in life that if you don't lean into the process, life will just beat it into you. And we prefer to not have things beaten into us when we can help it, right? Like we want to like welcome it and we want to embrace it. So that's the best advice I could probably give. I wish I knew how vulnerable it was, especially because the first places that I worked, I was in a responder car. And there were many times where I was by myself on scene waiting for an ambulance to come. I was maybe instructing, someone from the police department to do CPR while I was managing all of the other things that needed to be done. And so depending on where you work, even when you work in a system where you might have, two people in the ambulance, both ALS, or one person ALS, one person BLS, you just kind of have to be prepared for being alone with yourself and knowing what to do next, and knowing how to stay calm, how to call when you need for more help or more resources, when things need to be changed in the system, how to advocate for yourself, how to advocate for your patients. There's just so many transitions in one day of EMS that leave you needing to advocate, needing to stay organized, needing to stay professional. And when we're all working many, many hours on probably not enough sleep a lot of the time, we're not always functioning at our best. And so it's very easy to let those things lapse because they become not part of the survival anymore. The thing that I would say, just the biggest takeaway is like, don't let yourself into survival mode. Like keep yourself outside of that so that you can still perform high functioning tasks, right? The most that you can. Like there's going to be days where you're in survival mode, but try to keep yourself out of that. Try to keep on top of your wellness. Try to keep on top of just the reality of what you're signing up for so that you go in really like with a level head and kind of like an open mind. Students were human beings, so we're adaptive, right? And so the old learning environments used to be very much like it's not ACLS, it's not paramedic school unless like someone leaves crying. And we don't want that anymore. It's not good for learning. It's not good for, people's self-esteem. It's not good for their development. It's not really good for anything. So that just doesn't have a use anymore, right? We have technology, we have calculators, we have reference cards, we have protocols on our phones now. And as much as that can be great, it can also be inhibitive. So we want to kind of make sure that we're staying on top of our own mental health, but we're also staying on top of our content and our knowledge so that we have that balance. I would say that there's sort of like this trauma inflicted learning that sometimes occurs in cohorts, right? Like what we see in paramedic school, where you bond with your other students out of really just like an adaptive measure. So I would say do that because it's essential, right? Like in the most stressful environments, that's what animals and humans do. Like we cling to each other, right? So I think that that's really important to sort of like lean into those friendships that are going through the same class that you're going through at the same pace you're going to. It's essential. Humans are social creatures. We need that to some extent. And on top of that, just everyone has their own way to self-regulate. You know, some people like yoga and meditation, and some people would get more stress doing yoga and meditation than anything else. I remember there's like an episode of Parks and Rec where the guy is sitting there with like an acupuncture needle with his friends that are all trying to relax. And he says, "This is the most stressed I've ever been." And it's like, yeah, like I can't say, everyone should just sit down with a cup of tea, like, and that'll just fix everybody. But like, that's great for me. Right. So I think that again, it comes to being in tune with yourself. Like, what actually helps you regulate? What actually helps you slow down? What helps you feel calm? What helps you feel at peace? Make sure you lean into that, even if you have to schedule it. And sometimes you have to schedule it. If you're this busy and you're in paramedic school, more than likely you need to put it on the calendar. And this is something I do in my own personal relationships. We put do nothing on the calendar, or we put go for a walk, like because otherwise we may not do it, right? We may just watch another show, or we might just keep reading another chapter of our book or whatever, right? And we don't like get active, or we don't do things that are good for us. Evidence and research shows over and over again we need like 15 minutes of sunlight on our face every day, no matter how cold it is out, no matter how much snow is on your stoop or whatever. Like, you need to get out there. So just like little basic things like that, like it sounds so simple, but all together leaning into whatever regulates you, making sure that you stay confident and stay on top of your knowledge in an organized way, make sure you stay structured. Those will all help your wellness. Even if you have to schedule your wellness, make sure that you're doing that self-care. In my time of training students out, both in the field and in the classroom, something that I pick up on students that's definitely key for success is their ability to relate to other people. You can like not score the highest in the class, but be a really relatable person and be a better EMS professional. Even if you knew everything in the book, if you can't relate to another person, you're just not going to bridge that gap that you need to have rapport with your patients. I would say it's a mix, right? They need to have some sort of self intrinsic motivation, determination to do what they want to do. They have to have the grit to sit and to do some rote, painful studying sometimes to get through to the next thing when they need to get through the next thing. And then they also just need to have that relatability. They need to be able to look a patient in the eye and communicate with them. They need to put their hand over their hand when they're feeling stressed, with appropriate touch. They need to introduce themselves and have social skills. And a lot of those things we don't always do automatically, especially like with my generation and beyond. I find we struggle with this because we're all post-COVID people in a sense, in our adult development. And so it doesn't always come naturally. But there are plenty of ways to engage in that. I have a friend right now who's doing a public speaking group. They like meet up and they just do public speaking with each other. This is like a social group. And it's something that she really wants to do because she wants to become a politician. And she has like this fear of public speaking. So this is like what she's doing for herself, right? So I think in 2026 and beyond, when we have just like unlimited resources for things like this, like seek out those things that are going to help you become who you envision to be, yourself in 5 years, yourself in 10 years. Like, get yourself those skills and kind of ask for help, in what you need help in. As much as it's great to be well-rounded, something like neonatal resuscitation, I don't do that every day. No medic does that every day unless they work on like a specific truck for that somewhere, or like a hospital system or something like that, right? So if you see topics that you're not doing all the time, like take those, because otherwise you're not going to have that working knowledge unless you're like constantly putting yourself in front of it. And then also, like, if you haven't taken a certain topic in a while, if you haven't sat in a room with a content expert in a certain topic in a while, look for it. It's out there. It's either online or it's in person or it's somewhere. So I would say definitely seek those out. Seek out special topics, seek out, kind of unpopular topics or topics you don't see a whole lot as frequently. Like those high risk, low frequency topics are always sometimes the most important to seek out for CME. And, teach, go and teach somewhere, try to teach it to your colleagues. Sit there and be like, I'm going to run a scenario and you're going to perform a scenario and then we're going to switch, right? Like you don't have to be hired somewhere to teach. You can just use that as your own learning tool. So I would say those are all kind of like essential CME skills. But something that I also would encourage is if you really like or you're drawn to a certain topic, like become a content expert in it. Like I was really attracted to mental health. And even since before I did EMS, I was attracted to it. So I decided, like, all right, I'm going to become a social worker and I'm going to keep working in EMS and I'm going to keep working in education, but I'm going to bring that to the table as something that's different, that's special. And I'm not saying you have to go get, another degree or seek out anything formal, but what really speaks to you and what really is important to you is obvious to other people once you're explaining it or you're teaching it. So I would say find what's special to you. Seek out stuff that's hard and not easy and high risk and low frequency, and make that be kind of like the bread and butter of like how you run your own education, because your education is really something you're responsible to maintain. Something that I admire about BMCC's curriculum would be that they're really moving towards a degree-based program. And I think that, for EMS to be recognized as a profession in general, as an essential service, et cetera, that's sort of what needs to happen is we need to sort of be working with the Board of Ed in a way, like where we're becoming more recognized, formally or informally. And there was a documentary that came out not that long ago. It was by a colleague of mine up in Westchester who she had a couple of children in EMS, and she made a documentary about, broken, etc. the system is, but also how like it's hopeful where, legislators are starting to listen to how we should be an essential service, which means that we get more tax money funded to us if we become an essential service, like things like that. So I think that the more that we acknowledge the learning path and kind of the rigor that it takes to become a paramedic, I think that the better it is for the profession because it just acknowledges the work and the uniqueness that the profession has versus, other tracks in medicine. So instead of becoming just a stepping stone to something else, it really becomes something in its own right. So that's the vision in the future and the hope that I have for EMS. And I do think that even if it takes a little while or a long while, it will get there. And I think it's going to require a lot of advocacy and it's going to require a lot of education. And that's kind of like what we're here to sort of start doing is to start that even sooner, right? Before people go into paramedic school so that we don't have really good potential paramedics not making it through because of X, Y, or Z that really could have been easily corrected or easily supported from the very beginning. I always thought from a practical sense, like, oh, this would be good. Like, I'd know how to do first aid on like my kids or, people that we have over our house or things like that. So I think there's a lot of practical knowledge to like knowing how to stop a nosebleed or like clean up a wound. Like, those are really great to know. I think there's, a very non-zero benefit to knowing those skills. So that's number one. Just kind of being able to be calm in the chaos, I think is just beneficial to any part of your life, whether it's, from as formally to, having a classroom or controlling a scene or, trying to manage a temper tantrum on a child. Like, I feel like all of those things are kind of just the same, right? It just comes back to that self-regulation, that self-awareness, and that ability to be the calm in the chaos. I think that's probably like my biggest takeaway from EMS, but also the ability to multitask, the ability to do something important, the ability to do something that matters, that makes a difference to people. It's usually the worst day of someone's life when you're on the ambulance. So you go home kind of feeling like you did something good and you can't really say that about every profession, I think there's something special about that. There are many other professions that have that, but EMS, it's more vulnerable. We're in people's homes. We see them on their worst day in their worst outfit, like it's just different. It's different than the emergency room even, which is like close, but no cigar, right? So I would say just life skills are erupt and they get beaten into you while being, in paramedic school, while working in EMS, whether you like it or not. And for better or for worse, that sort of just becomes part of your personality. And I think it's really helped me just to become a better person and a smarter person and, a more equipped person in lots of different situations that are not just specific to working as a 911 paramedic. It's so funny because when outside of EMS, when people ask me what's your greatest accomplishment, I'm like paramedic school. Like it took everything in me to get through paramedic school. I joke about that. I joke that, and it's not really a joke, it's reality. It's like MBA, yeah. MSW, yeah. Math degree. I had a bachelor's in math before I went into paramedic school. Like great accomplishments. I feel very proud of them. And I was very lucky to have really good resources and, people to help me get where I wanted to be in all of those areas. But paramedic school was like the biggest pride that I ever had at a graduation. And it wasn't even a credit degree when I got it. It was just the ability to sort of get to the end, the ability to grow and acquire that knowledge like was so meaningful to me. In my personal life, I wouldn't say that's my biggest accomplishment. I would hope. Yeah, I would say, I have a very successful marriage. I'm very happy with that. And it took a lot to get there, but I'm very proud of the relationship that I built, with my husband. And he's not in EMS, but that's good for us. But he's very interested, in what I do and vice versa. I appreciate that he's a software engineer and he could fix my computers, and he appreciates all the things that I do. We have mutual appreciation. But yeah, so I think it's really important, like because as much as for a lot of my life my profession was my life. That was what got me up in the morning and got me to go places and do things. Like my relationship is my biggest accomplishment at this point in my life. And everything that comes from that, like the things that we build together, etc. I think also just being driven to the point of almost being so unwell and so in survival mode, of getting through paramedic school, working EMS as a career, it sort of forced me to look introspectively and clean up myself. And I think that that was really good, for me as a person. So I'm also proud of the fact that I don't work 80 hours a week anymore, that I have an eclectic career where I get to teach a little bit and I get to do therapy a little bit and I get to go outside and go on walks. And there's a saying, it's not really relevant here, but it's like success is the biggest revenge. It's sort of like success is the biggest way to look back on your life and not have regret. And that's kind of how I see myself right now. Is my biggest accomplishment is getting to the point where I'm happy with what I do every day. I'm happy with who I spend time with. I'm happy with what I build together, with the people that are important to me. So I'm a musician. I like to sing. I'm in a bunch of choirs up in where I live, and we perform kind of all over. So I'm in a chamber choir of women called Angelica. They perform in New York City. They perform in Westchester, and it's given me a lot of joy, just to kind of sit there and like sing, chant, and like meditative music with people, who are really solid musicians. And it's a very democratic group. Like we all give input on if we want to change timing or change, lyrics or whatever. And I think that can be good and bad, but like it could be kind of chaotic, but it's sort of fun. And then I have a group that I do with my husband. We both sing in a larger, co-ed kind of choir together. And that's brought a lot of joy to my life to kind of be in that community, the same way that EMS has brought a lot of joy to my life and I identify with that. I also identify with this side of myself. It's created really fabulous connections for me, both professionally and just personally, for me to just enrich my life a lot more. So yeah, people are usually surprised to hear that I sing. confidence, acquired or otherwise. A lot of us, especially women, we go in with this imposter syndrome. And I think just acquiring that confidence can be a challenge for some people. But some people come in with the confidence, right? So they don't need to acquire that. Maybe they need to acquire more knowing what they don't know and more knowledge about different topics and areas. So I would say that the most important qualities are probably self-awareness, because that kind of gets you everywhere else. And empathy and compassion for other people, because you can't work in this job for more than a couple of months if you don't have empathy and compassion for other people. So I think those two things together are really probably the most important things. There's definitely a lot of negativity. I mean, you'll see negativity anywhere. It's not unique to EMS. You know, you can walk into a locker room or a staff room in any profession and you'll hear negativity. But I do find in EMS, it's sort of like runs rampant. Whether it's complaining about, patients we see over and over again, or other staff members, or a lack of competence, or the hospitals that we bring patients to, there's always kind of sometimes this jadedness that sort of erupts after we become sleep deprived enough and we become, sort of like integrated enough where it is just our identity. And so I would caution students from having this become their entire identity. It doesn't mean that you can't be a paramedic forever. It doesn't mean that you can't work as a paramedic full time forever. It just means that you should have other things outside of being a paramedic that are important to you, whether it be teaching and using your paramedic skills that way, or, some really good books you like to read, or a book club you like to go to, or a yoga class, or, drinking tea, whatever is your thing. Make sure that you either lean into those things or develop those areas of creativity too, so that it doesn't just become your only identity. Because I think when that's all we can see, that is kind of how we only see what's wrong with it. It's sort of like we see the warts of someone that we're with a long time before we see them on a first date, right? Like, and I think that's sort of how EMS is. It's like once you get deep enough into it, you see everything that's wrong with it, which would happen if you got that deep into anything. So try to stay sort of like subjective in the areas that need to be subjective, but stay objective as well, so that you can be the change when you see something that needs to be changed instead of just sit and complain about it. Because humans love to complain, it's in our nature. I think that new EMS professionals don't get enough support. I think, like, even if we give them a lot of support pre-paramedic school and in paramedic school, the second that they get that first job, it's like every man for himself. And I'm not saying everywhere that hires you is like that. I'm just saying my personal experience and how I've seen our young get eaten up in EMS. That just kind of tends to be the vibe where there's not a whole lot of energy left to have patience for new people. There's not a lot of energy left and bandwidth left to sit with someone and really help them with something that maybe they're not so good at when they first start out. Like they don't have the muscle memory for something, and they need to do it a couple of times, or just a concept that they're not grasping. Why are we giving this medication? Why can we only give this many doses or this many minutes apart? I think we need to try to lean into that more, not just in the classroom, but out in our field providers. Like we need to kind of emphasize that friendly learning a little bit more. I think that it's something that lacks a lot. I went to a conference with one of my good friends, a colleague I met teaching and in EMS, and we were sitting, in the hotel, probably in the pool or the hot tub or whatever. We were talking. And we're like, but what don't we hear a lot of in these conferences? Like what could we teach, right? And so we were bouncing around these like mental health type topics, and we talked about sleep being something that people don't get good quality sleep, right? And the reasons why, when you're so activated, you don't always get good quality sleep. So we decided to propose a topic for the next year's conference. And I think we submitted a few other topics as well, but that's the one that won out of the ones that we submitted. We submitted like three I think I submitted three of my own, she submitted three of her own, and then we submitted three together. And something like that. It might not have been as many, but it felt like that. The workload felt like it was three each. So, but that was the one that was selected. And so we ended up presenting that together. And that was like kind of a nice moment in my career where I got to, lecture on something important to me, to the EMS community, and do it with my friend and sort of collaborate on it. And she's really like a very experienced career paramedic where this is kind of like what she's done forever. But she also does simulation. She also does teaching. And so, we have our Venn diagram of overlaps, but sort of like also two different lenses. And so having the experience to do that collaboration and to present on a topic like that was a feel good moment for me. There's always that saying, like, it's like, be the change you want to see in the world. I even had said this in like my undergrad, right? So this is like a long time ago. Math major problem solver. That was sort of like who I wanted to be. I wanted to like take apart systems and fix them. And I've brought that to the table, I think, in EMS in some ways, not just with the reforms that I've tried to practice in my own education for EMS, and even just healthcare workers, because I also have taught doctors and nurses and respiratory therapists and medical assistants and, the wide gamut of other health professions as well. And educational reform is needed across the board. It's not just EMS education. But I've also brought that into just like my friendships. I have people calling me and asking me for advice on things now all the time, which is funny because it's something that they told us in LMSW school would happen. It's like your friends are now going to become your clients. And it's true. And it's funny because like you're sort of bridging that gap between like I know what I should say to you, but like I can't say that now because we're like in friendship mode, right? So I'm going to say like the friend thing and not like the therapist thing, right? And so there's sort of these two parts of yourself. And so like that sort of operates in EMS as well. So like what I would want people to look back and like remember me for would be just kind of integrating those things into my practice, right? Like becoming better, not just for myself, but like for what I can bring to the world, right? What can I fix? What can I change? And what can I actually do about it instead of just complaining or, kind of, wishing it was better. I think like becoming part of that active process is like really important to me.